Open your Bible to 1 Thessalonians. I think these 5 characteristics are something that any church and every church ought to aspire to and hopefully emulate. First of all, he says, you're an energetic church, which is good. It should be a church that is alive. He says also, you are elect. You were chosen by God. If God didn't start a church, there's no reason for it to be there. Churches are not begun by men. They should be begun by God. Problem we have is so many men are starting churches and God has nothing to do with it. But this particular church here at Thessalonica was chosen and founded by God. Through some trouble and through some difficulty, as we look through the writings, we'll find out. So they were energetic, they were elect, they were exemplary. He said, you know what? I could stand you up and say to other churches, they ought to be like you folks. They ought to be like you. They went through tests. You remember, Paul was only in Thessalonica for maybe 3 weeks. 3 Sundays. If he started on a Sunday and ended on a Sunday, he was only there really for 2 weeks. If he started the week before, went through a Sunday, another week, another Sunday, and say, maybe you could stretch it to 4 weeks at most that he was there. But these Thessalonians, they know a thing or two. As we begin to get in there and Paul begins to answer some of their questions, in fact, this book of Thessalonica is where we get one of the great things about the second coming of Jesus Christ. Right away, these people are interested. And Paul has to write to them in the second letter and tell them, listen, get back to work, you know. So they were an exemplary church. So they were a church that studied. They were a church that showed the love. They were a church, when Paul first comes in there as he's preaching, right away there's a riot breaks out. Everybody wants to stone Paul and kill off the Christians, but they persevere. And they stay faithful through it all. And so he says, you know, you're an example to other believers. We should all be that. They were evangelistic. This was a group of people who wanted to tell the gospel to those that they met. This was a group of people that wanted to go out into their city and let their city know that Jesus Christ was the hope of heaven. That this Jesus, though he was over here in Judea, and here they find themselves over here in Greece, that this Jesus who died in Jerusalem died for those there in Thessalonica. Though they knew nothing about him, it was important to the church that this story of Jesus should get out. To think that a man who died on a cross in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago can still affect my life today. That was the good news that I heard. And so this great church, evangelistic, wanting to get out there and to tell the good news of Jesus Christ. What church shouldn't be about their Father's business? And so finally, they were an expectant people. They were waiting for Jesus to come back. They were hoping, they were expecting, they were waiting, they were getting ready for. They were living their lives like Jesus might come back tomorrow. And that's the way we're supposed to. In fact, the second coming is supposed to be the hope. It is supposed to be that cleansing thing in our life. We live our lives with the thought that Jesus could come back. How should we behave ourselves if Christ should enter into our presence today? And so this was one of those things. And so we say, let us see how we might emulate these Thessalonians, even in our church. Brief history. Thessalonica comes into existence. Here they are, way up here, Thessalonica. They come into existence on Paul's second missionary tour. Paul's first journey, he very quickly leaves Antioch, comes down here through Salmos, Pergas, comes up here, and just kind of goes into this area right here. That was his first journey. And then he went back home. Now on his second journey, you'll notice Paul's from the city of Tarsus. So Paul, when he leaves Antioch, he goes on home, wants to make sure that folks there. He wants to make sure that his family knows of Jesus Christ. And then from Tarsus, he heads up through Derbe, and these were cities that he visited in the original. And then, boom, up here into Galatia, he goes all the way across, finally to Troas, making the jump. Boom, landing in Europe, the first time the Europeans heard the gospel. Asia, his first missionary tour. Part of his second missionary tour. But then finally he makes the leap, because while he's spending the night over here in Troas, he gets what we call the Macedonian vision. A man comes to him and says, come on over here. Come on over here. We want the gospel too. So Paul gets up and says, hey, they want the gospel over there. He gets up, you know the story, he ends up in Philippi. But it's not a man that he sees. The Macedonian vision, a man says to him, come on over. And so they cross over that little bit of water there. He gets there. Remember, Lydia is the woman that they meet there. She's a seller of purple. And there in Philippi, they have settled the first church in Europe. Very, very significant. Because remember, God said you got to go to all the parts of the world. And so here they are now, making their way into Greece, which leads them now into Europe. After Philippi, they're going to come on down over here through these different little towns and finally land right here at Thessalonica. And as I said, he's going to spend about 3 weeks there. This, his first letter, he gets chased out of town. They start their church right there in the synagogue, but it isn't very long before the Jews start a ruckus and they start a riot. And so the brethren here say, you got to get out of town. So he leaves, heads from Berea. Berea, he's going to come down to Athens, wait in Athens for a while, and finally he's going to center himself here in Corinth. When he gets to Corinth, he hears reports. Timothy comes down because he leaves Timothy behind. And Silas stay behind to establish the church, to build up and to anoint the elders and the deacons and to establish the actual function of the church itself. While Paul is down here, he gets word through these men that there are some problems going on here in Thessalonica. Church hasn't been around all that long and already has problems. Now see, that's not like today, because churches get established and they never have problems. Right? We're probably established 3 weeks and every church goes through problems. So right away, while Paul's here in Corinth, he gets word and he writes these 2 letters, the first and second letters to the Thessalonians. He begins his letter, of course, by reminding them of what it was that he saw in them and how faithful they were. And they still are. They got some questions. Everybody does. And so he is going to handle some of those questions. This is a verse I've chosen for you. 1 Thessalonians verse 3. I see 3 things here. Preachers, whenever we read a verse, we always see 3 things in every verse we find. And so these are the 3. This is how the outline is going to lay itself. Remembering without ceasing your work of faith. Underline that word work there. The word work there means your business. It is your business of faith. What is the business of faith? It's that normal thing that we conduct ourselves in. Faith, believing, Christianity is my business. It's what I am and what I do. You meet people and you say to them, oh, what do you do? And they'll say, well, I'm a banker, I'm a lawyer, I'm a bum on the street, whatever they might be. If you were to ask us, people would say to us, what are you? And we'd say, well, first and foremost, I am a Christian. That's my description. That's who and what I am. Beyond that, I'm pastor of a church. Beyond that, I'm the father of a family. Beyond that, I'm a grandfather to some of the greatest kids this world has ever seen. Right? So we all have those things. But it begins your work of faith. He's not talking about labor. He's not talking about struggle. He's talking about this is your life, your work, your business of faith. What is your business of faith? We'll get into that in just a little bit. We continue though. And then he comes on and says your labor of love. These Thessalonians knew somewhat about labor. This word labor here is the word toil. It has to do with the wearing down of the body. When you go to work and you come home, you usually come home tired because your body has been worn by toil, by the work that you do. And so these 2 words, work, are very different. This is your business, the business of your faith, the winning of souls, the glorifying of God, the exalting of Jesus Christ. Those things are the business of my faith. This labor of love are the things that we do because of that. What is the actual day-to-day of it? The struggle. This idea, toil here, this labor of love, carries with it the idea of struggle. This is hard. This is heartbreaking. This is difficulty. This is a struggle. The struggle of your love. Christianity, nobody said that Christianity was going to be easy. Nobody said that the work of the church would be simple and would be easy. It requires the labor of our love, because sometimes it's real work just to stay at it. The labor of our love you're sitting on right now. These pews, you will remember, just a few months ago, were dirty, nasty, and disgusting. We decided that we would take them apart and that we would redo them. Well, you struggled to come up with the money. Luke and Mr. Christian struggled to fabricate or to cover everything. My wife struggled to sand and to varnish all of these things. That's the labor of love. It wore their bodies. I would find poor Mr. Christian stretching and stretching and stretching, because you got to pull this material real tight so it doesn't sag forever. And I mean, he'd have great beads of sweat coming down his face. You know, I was helping Luke one or twice. I'm laying on the floor, breathing hard, and he's saying, "Come on, Dad." Hey, it was a labor. It was a toil. It was a struggle of to get these things done. From the rolling of the thing, it would begin to wear on my knuckles from having to pull on that material. And it's rather coarse stuff, so it's like sanding down my knuckles. This is what he's talking about here when he talks about the labor of your love. There should be, your body should be worn. You should have some exhaustion because of the things that you have done for God. If you're not exhausted, if you're not worn, if you don't need rest, you're doing nothing for God. And then he talks about the patience of hope. The patience of hope here, patience is that, well, it's rendered cheerful restfulness, cheerful waiting. What? You're being persecuted. Remember, we just said they were being persecuted, these people. Yet they were cheerfully waiting for what? They were waiting for the second coming of Jesus Christ. I know that someday Jesus Christ will come for the church. If I don't live to see that day, someday he's coming for me. There will come a day and a time when I will be probably laying in a bed somewhere. My children and grandchildren will be singing the great songs of the faith, and they'll be waiting for Dad to sail on to heaven. There's coming that day for me. I know, though, on that particular day, I know that my Redeemer will be waiting for me. I know I won't make that transition from this life to that life alone. I know he will accompany me through the valley of the Shelley, through the valley of the, my wife's going to remember this one. She records all these slip-ups that I make. And then she goes back and she watches the video. Oh, he said that word wrong too. And so the valley of the shadow of death. I know he is going to escort me through all that, and I know I'm going to be fine through it all. Why? Because I have the patience of hope. I have this cheerful waiting. Granted, you know why we're cheerfully waiting at the end? Because we're exhausted. Because this labor, this toil of love has worn us out. So you get home from work, and what do? You just sit down. Usually when I get home from work at the end of the day, I'll get into my recliner and I'll sit down, usually taking a brief nap. Okay, my wife and kids will be talking to me. Dad's gone. Why? Because the labor of love wore me out, so I'm patiently waiting now. I've got no more energy left to expend. All I can do is wait. But I'm cheerfully waiting. I'm hopefully waiting. I know my labor's not in vain in Christ. I know that my work of faith will be accomplished. The thing that I am and what I do. So let's take a look at these things. Our patience of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ in the sight of God and our Father. The Father knows. He is watching. He sees the things that I do. He is witness to the work of faith. In fact, when you get to the book of Hebrews, it tells us that the Father is not faithful to forget our labor of love. He's watching. He's careful. He knows. He's bearing witness, so that when we stand there in heaven and he says to us, "What did you do for my son?" "Well, I went to church once in a while, when I wasn't too busy." Oh, labor of love, work of faith. Wow, come on in, you must be exhausted. When he says that, some of us are going to be a little bit embarrassed on that particular account. Let's take a look at this then. We said already that this was an energetic church. They were doing something. We took a look at the activity that they were doing, and we saw these three graces involved in in their lives. Their work of faith, their labor of love, and their patience of hope. Actually, as we continue then and we look at these things, this faith is the awakening of our soul to the reality of life. When we look at it, the reality of my life is Jesus Christ, the most real thing you'll find. And so this work, this awakening of faith allows me to see it is the evidence of things not seen. It is the evidence of those things that are hoped for, according to Paul. And so I look, and suddenly my faith shows around me that there is a God in heaven, that there is a Christ who died for me, who was buried, is risen again, and is coming for me. And that he has said to me, you need to be about my Father's business. And so my faith says this is the reality of life. The reality of life is not that I should be a hospital engineer and get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, that I should be there at 7 o'clock, and that I should clock out at 3:30. That's not what my life is supposed to be about. Granted, that is a part of my life, but that's not what defines me. My definition, my awakening was brought about by faith, which said to me, you are so much more. You are, after all, a child of God. And my faith says, as a child of God, you've got a business. You've got a way to perform it. People have a right and a responsibility to meet Christians every now and then. People have a right and a responsibility to meet people who are different from them. And so that they say to us, what makes you different? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why are you different? Because I'm a Christian. Because I believe in Jesus Christ the righteous. Because he has challenged me to do these things. Mr. Loy, who used to sit over here with us, when I first got to the hospital, one of the first men I met. I was there for a week or so, and he came up to me. He said, I want you to pray for me. He said, I realize looking at your life that my life isn't what it should be. He said, I forgot about Jesus. I forgot about service. And so he rededicated his life there in the boiler room. Convicted by what he saw in me, he realized that what he saw in my life was the way his life was supposed to be also. And so he went home and he made that announcement to his wife and his kids, and they all began going to church again. Of course, you know, last summer Mr. Loy had an accident and was killed. His family called me and said, I want to thank you for what you did for my dad. Because they knew when he died, they knew he was with Jesus Christ, because the evidence that they had seen in his life, the change in his life said to them that God is real in my dad's life. See, we could tell our kids that we're Christians, but it's another thing if they see it for themselves. And they say, I know God's real because I saw it in Dad. And it was instrumental in their life. It's what gave them hope and encouragement when they got the news that their dad passed away. And so they wanted to call me and thank me for that simple thing. Why? Because it's the work of my faith. It is the business of my Christianity to share my faith with other people. It is the business of my Christianity to walk a walk and talk a talk that says to people, there is a living word, the Word of God. There is a word that changes men. I am not the man I used to be. And by God's grace, I will continue to be a different man every day until I become more and more like Jesus Christ. Why? Because that's the work of my faith. My eyes have been opened. My life has been changed. God has entered in. And so the business of my faith is to show a lost and dying world that there really is a God. And that this God is known through His Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for us. And if this story, this death, this burial, this resurrection doesn't change our life, then what will? People have that right. Our faith is also an inspiration for us to discharge our life. Our faith is an inspiration because I know God is coming. It inspires me. It motivates me to change. It motivates me to do the things that I do. Why did I become a preacher? I became a preacher not that I wanted to. Last thing in my mind ever when I got saved was to be a preacher. I was afraid of talking in front of people. It's hard to believe that today, I know. But there was a time when I could not talk in front of people. But when Christ came in, all of that changed. And the business of my life became the sharing of the gospel with others. To such an extent that God could use me to stand before crowds of people after that and to tell them of Jesus Christ. And so I've seen my many's come to Jesus Christ. I have been there. Why? Because faith accomplishes things. Work always follows faith. You see right here, sometimes people argue that James and Paul argue a lot. James says, for without works, your faith is dead. And isn't that really what Paul is saying here? Faith, works, he says, always follows faith. There will always be some physical reminder, something left behind that said he or she had faith. Our faith is this church. If Jesus Christ comes, this building will be left behind as a testimony to those people believed something. Those people had faith. They trusted. There was some evidence left behind. There will always be evidence because work always follows belief. Whatever we believe. There's some work that goes with it. We're told the story, for example, of trust. The king of Greece was given a note which said, your doctor, your friend, when he gives you this medicine, is planning on poisoning you. The king took the note and placed it under his pillow. Shortly after that, his doctor comes in. And the doctor says to the king, this is the medicine that you need. So the king reached under his pillow, grabbed the note, handed the note to the doctor while he took the medicine. I believe in my friend. I believe in the doctor. I believe in this man. Even though the note said he is trying to kill you, he said, I have faith in you. Sometimes, God looks like he's our enemy. We say this often that we're supposed to trust God even when he looks like he's the enemy. God the Father looked like the enemy of his Son as he was being nailed to the cross. But who was it that said, Father, forgive them? Sometimes the things God asks us to do look like he's aiming for us, but that's not the truth. My thoughts toward you, he said, are good. God is working in our life to develop something. And so we must trust his word. Reminds me of the story of 3 boys went to school. And their teacher said, I'm going to give you a problem that's going to be very, very difficult to solve. It will be a hard problem to solve. They went home. The first student said, it's impossible. I can't find a solution to this problem. And so he quit. The second boy studied for a while, looked at the problem, and suddenly he just closed the book and said, it can be done because I've seen it done before. Can't explain it, but I saw it. He was comfortable with that. The third boy, though, studied long into the night and continued and would argue with himself. And he said, I know their problem, the solution can be found because the master said so. The teacher said so. And this is the point we have to get to sometimes in our life. We have to understand that, yes, life is difficult, but you can make it through because the master said so. Jesus promised that I can do all things through him. Jesus promised that he would be there with me through the struggle, through the toil, through the heartache. He would never leave me nor forsake me. Jesus promised that I can be effective. Jesus promised that I can accomplish. Jesus promised that I will be victorious. Even the gates of hell themselves cannot prevail against me. That was his promise. And so I trusted. Why? Because the master said so. And when we come to God's word, we realize, how do I know that this book is true? Because I've seen it exercised in somebody else's life? No. But simply because God said so. If God said it, that's enough. It must be true because God said it. And so an answer must be found. Victory must be mine because God said so. Our labor of love, then, we said we distinguish between our normal work and our labor here, our toil. Labor of love. When everything seems to go against us, that's when this one kicks in. When it's easy, there's no labor of love. It's a joy to do it. It's easy to go to church when everybody says to you, I'm crazy about you. It's easy when everybody says, you know what, you're the world's greatest preacher. You say, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's easy when people are on your side. It's quite the other thing, though, when you walk in that door and nobody wants you there. Been there, too. And when it looks like everybody's acting against you, yeah, that's when it becomes a labor of love. When it's hard, when it's difficult, when it's a struggle, when it's a labor of love. And Paul said to these, remember now, the Thessalonian church was being persecuted. Right away, they were being attacked by the city. You can't bring that stuff. The Jews were saying, you can't preach Jesus here. We're Jews. We believe in God. We don't believe that he had a son named Jesus. You can't preach that stuff here. And they started riots. But the people hung on. They held on to their labor of love. It became a labor because suddenly they were being persecuted for that which they believed. Those who were once Jews and had become Christians, at home they were being forsaken. Mom and dad saying, you can't come back here anymore. It became a labor of love. But they fell in love with Jesus Christ. And that's what sustains. That's, it's like marriage. It's a labor of love. It's easy sometimes. The first week is so easy. Everything's going your way. But then after a while, you do face those struggles. When your wife, you begin to have children, all of a sudden you're having more family than you got money. It begins to be a little bit of a struggle. But that's when marriage becomes a labor of love. And you find a way to make it successful because you're in love. And so you find out how to make it work. And so it goes into this labor. Yes, it sometimes can be a struggle. Yes, sometimes it's difficult. Yes, you have to find a way to agree with each other. And all of these things go into it. All of a sudden you got a mortgage, you got car payments, and you got babies, you got everything. And it becomes, what was once that honeymoon suddenly is now a labor of love. That's just the way life goes. And so you face it through and you struggle with these things. And so they did. It's a labor of love when you're persecuted by those you seek to save. It could be a labor of love when you see the fruits in other people that you don't see in yourself. How come they overcome their sin so quickly and I have such a trouble with it? You look at some people and they don't have any difficulty, and then you seem to have such a struggle with your Christianity. And sometimes it's easy to say, I wish I was like them. Well, we all have those things that come into our lives and so easily beset us. But labors of love and patience of hope, that restful part of our life. It's all based on what is hoped in, what is hoped for. In the Thessalonian church, their hope, this was the climax of their fruit. They abided in God. And so now they were simply biding their time. There's coming a day when Jesus will come for me. I'm going to rest in that idea. I say to people often, what's the absolute worst thing that'll ever happen to me? I die and go to heaven. What's the absolute best thing that could ever happen to me? I die and go to heaven. See, the worst and the best are really at the same point. And this is where the Thessalonians came into. They came to understand and to realize the best and worst was that they would die for Jesus Christ or die in Christ. Both were glorious because both got them to where they want to go. Where do Christians want to go? We all want to go to heaven. And ultimately and eventually we get there. That's the patience of waiting. Granted, we're not rushing to day, right? We're patiently waiting for it. Some of us are growing older by the year, patiently waiting. But this is my hope. This is my cheerful wait. I know it's coming. I don't know when, but I know it's coming. I don't know the hour, but I know He's coming. I can cheerfully wait. I've waited now over 40 years for Him to come. And it has not been difficult. Because in those 40 years, we're still busy. We still have the work of our faith to keep us going. We still have the labor of our love, while we enjoy the patience of our hope. See, we are abiding God's time. Problem with God is a day with Him is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. God will say, I'll do that one tomorrow. But He doesn't have the same clock that you and I run on. And it's easy for Him to get busy taking care of a whole world. Oh, He's got it all planned. He knows exactly the time and the date and who it is. We've gone through Revelation. We got to wait for all those people and all those things to line up just right so that God can punch the clock and say, okay, time is over. But He does. He told those martyrs, all right, I've had enough. Let's kick it in now. And sure enough, just like clockwork, everything started. But we're on God's time frame, not yours. Problem is, we all want to hurry God up. But patience is waiting on God. That's the patience of our hope. Patient hope has the idea of getting hold of someone's arm and leaning on it. In this case, it would be God. You ever walk with an old person? You ever walk with a child? You don't get to walk at your pace. I remember when Grandma would grab hold of my arm before she was in her wheelchair. We'd come into the church. And I didn't race down over there like I would normally do, like I did last week when the national anthem was playing, and come flying down here. No. When you're walking with an old person, older person I should say, she placed her arm on me. She leaned on me, and guess what that required of me? I had to walk at her pace. I had to walk at her pace. She was patiently waiting. I had to be patient as well. We sing that song, Leaning on the Everlasting Arm. We have to lean on the Father's arm. That's what the patience of our hope is. But the Father is not always in a big hurry. We want to get everywhere now. That's why we keep making our cars faster and faster and faster. Nobody wants to take a biplane anymore. Everybody wants to take the jet wherever they go someplace, right? You don't want to get in that old DC-3. Y'all want to get in the DC-10. It's faster. How many of you upgraded your phone so you could have faster internet service on your phone? Because remember, the old days, your phone was too slow. Everything was too slow. Next year, they'll be telling you, oh, you got to get the new one because that last one's too slow. Everything's all about speed. And we've caught on to that. So to us, everything's all about speed. We got to have the cartoon download real quick on our phones so we can see it. We're running out of patience. And so when we come along and we put our hand on God's arm, and we're in a big hurry, and God's not. If you're going to leave your arm in His, you have to walk slow. Can two walk together lest they be agreed? When my wife and I got married, we come down over here and we join hands like this, and then we walk up to the platform. We had to make sure we walked together. She couldn't get ahead of me, I couldn't get ahead of her. She had this big old flowy train. It would have gotten everybody's way, right? You had to learn to walk together. You have to learn to walk with God. That's what that patient hope is all about. If you lean on somebody, if you're being led or leading somebody, you've got to walk at a common speed. In this particular case, it's all about learning to walk like God walks. And so this patient of hope. But now, you see, I want you to know, Paul likes these three things. These three graces, Paul uses them over and over and over. In fact, in 1 Corinthians 13:13, he says, but now abides faith, hope, and love. These three. And the greatest of these is love. He is going to say this to us over and over and over again. You and I have a responsibility then to grow. We have a responsibility to ourselves become an example like they were there in Thessalonica. So we should probably learn from verse 3 these three things. When you get home, take a look at them yourself. Read them for yourself. See them with your own eyes written in that word. And then figure out how you're going to accomplish them in your life. Let's all stand.